Hi, Dan Verton, Executive Editor with MeriTalk. I'm at the CSX Cybersecurity Brainstorm in Washington, D.C. With me today is Mr. David Bray. David is a 2015 Eisenhower Fellow and is also the CIO of the FCC. David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So tell me a little bit about the fellowship, what you did, how that came about, and what you learned from it.
Sure. So the Eisenhower Fellowship has been around since the 50s. It's actually where they send about 9 or 10 people from the United States to 2 countries of their choosing for a period of time. In my case, it was about 5 weeks. And they also bring people from overseas, the United States as well. So it's a bit of a cultural exchange. It's nonpartisan, and you're intentionally meeting with people from both industry and government in the countries you choose. I was fortunate enough to go to Taiwan and Australia specifically to talk to them about what they're getting ready to do with the Internet of Everything, how they're going to handle cybersecurity, how they're going to handle privacy. Got to meet with both CEOs of large companies in both countries, and also meet with the Ministers of Defense, Justice, and Communications. Not a bad gig. It was a really nice. It was wonderful conversations because, of course, both of them are representative democracies, even if they have slightly different structures in how they run, or if they're a constitutional monarchy or things like that. But what was interesting was Taiwan, of course, is very aware of the cybersecurity challenge. And they were interested in how could they approach things, treating things much more as a cyber public health approach, because just the number of devices they have. We're going from a world in which this year alone, 2015, there's twice as many network devices on the face of the planet as there are humans, so 14 billion. By 2020, there'll be 50 billion. And so they said, just how do we handle this with scale? And so one thing that Taiwan was talking about is, could we treat it almost like cyber public health? Australia was interested in talking about how do we protect privacy. Privacy right now is mainly on the platforms for different things. Could they actually do a way of empowering consumers to express their preferences on how they share data? And then that could then be a broker to things like Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, as opposed to having your privacy settings on their platforms. How different were the perspectives from the United States, your experience in the US? Surprisingly similar. I do think the interesting thing that's true about the United States, and I actually think is quite healthy, is, remember, we fought a war against the king. I mean, we had a revolution, so we're a little more skeptical of our government, and actually I say that as a public official thinking that's actually healthy, because I think the solutions are going to require working with both the private sector, public sector, and the public most importantly. Both Taiwan and Australia, they were a little bit more trusting on letting their government do it. And I think that may just be, again, Australia is still technically part of the UK and the monarchy. Taiwan, it may just be part of their culture. So it was just interesting to compare that while they were both concerned about security and privacy, I think the US were much more interested in looking at what can industry do and what can public lead themselves, whereas Taiwan and Australia were a little bit different. So today at the Brainstorm, we talked about just a wide variety of cybersecurity issues, from insider threats to infrastructure security. I wanted to ask you about the importance of basic foundational cybersecurity controls as a starting point. You look at any survey today, one of the weaknesses, I think, that a lot of federal agencies face, and some private companies, is that they didn't or don't have, didn't at the time of a security breach, those foundational basic controls in place that may have, in fact, helped prevent a breach. Where is the federal government today in that effort, in your opinion, and what can we do to speed that up? Right. So I do think, and this is not just limited to government, I think this is actually something that's actually across both the private sector and the public sector, which is, unless you are a large organization that maybe is in the financial sector, or you're aware of possibly national security threats, it's hard to carve out money in a budget that's been limited by sequestration. It's hard to, even with IT budgets shrinking, to make the case for cybersecurity has to be invested up front. Because if you invest in it and nothing happens, was it useful or not? So I do think we need to actually focus on what can we do for two-factor authentication, can we make sure we have the right encryption in place. To me, the biggest concern I have is we have lots of really old systems. And as we know, as code and software gets older, that also means possible vulnerabilities that are out there for the code. It may even be the commercial vendor stops patching the software, and that creates risk. And so it's both, one, what we can do in terms of cyber hygiene 101, in terms of appropriate controls, but also how quickly can we get government off of old legacy systems and get them to the cloud. I would say the same thing is facing small businesses. A lot of small businesses, same thing. They may have some legacy financial system they've been using for 10 years. They may not have the money to actually upgrade it. I personally wish that IT systems came with expiration dates, where after maybe 7 years, they actually started releasing like a cheese-like smell through the building. And so everyone just was like, we got to fix this, but they don't. And so we have underinvested, and a lot of that is, right now, I think GAO said that government agencies, by and large, 80% of their budget is being spent on just maintaining the legacy systems they have. If we can get out of those legacy systems, we may be able to pivot and use those dollars to improve cybersecurity and at the same time have newer systems. And that will actually allow us to do things without having to ask for more IT dollars up front to try and secure things.
Now, I read a lot of what you write, and you're very active on social media talking about these issues. And I know that legacy systems is one of your biggest challenges, correct, at FCC? Do you find, is the legacy system issue something that is a factor in agencies' ability to be proactive to security issues as opposed to being reactive?
It is. So a lot of older systems were not built to make it readily available for you to check the audit logs. A lot of legacy systems make it difficult to try and do defense in depth because that was just not something that was around a decade ago. The good news is, over this Labor Day weekend, we did make a very concerted focus to move to a commercial vendor. So there will be additional layers wrapped around what we were doing. What we wanted to do, and we'd asked for funds, was to actually replicate our systems to newer systems at the commercial vendor. We didn't get that, and so we actually had to bite the bullet just because our budget was getting more and more consumed by maintaining those systems, where we physically powered everything off, loaded into 7 trucks, drove it to commercial vendor, fortunately brought everything back. We had to work through some cabling issues because there were thousands of cables that had to match exactly what they had been at the FCC. But the good news is, as a result of what we did on Labor Day, there are no servers being stored at the FCC headquarters anymore.
Wow, you physically removed them. And
we moved them. And in the process, that also allowed us to retire some older systems, allowed us to actually make some sense and say, well, now we need to have some additional protection around this because it was actually something that's vital. That doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet, because what I want to do now is, now that those servers are at a commercial service facility, we want to, over the next year and a half, use the cost savings that we will get from having done that push to move them eventually to a commercial cloud 100%, because a commercial cloud vendor will again have this scale of many more people than I could ever possibly afford at a small agency to focus on what's going on, what's rapidly going on in terms of if you have to contain something, if you have to turn something off, if you're seeing a threat. I have more trust in a public cloud than I do with trying to host it ourselves.
Right. So that's a fascinating point. And our viewers, I know, are going to be interested in this because they hear all the time from high-profile government CIOs that, yeah, we want to move to the cloud faster, but we're still concerned about, and they point to cultural issues, right? About people being really not ready to let go of that box. Talk a little bit about your comfort level from a security and a control management perspective of the data.
Right. So you're right. I mean, it is, at the end of the day, it's 80% people. And so part of what I had to do to lead up to this was, one, build relationships with the bureaus and offices, and have what I called entrepreneurs. So these are entrepreneurs on the inside. As IT brokers have those conversations about, look, at least with the server lift, you'll still have the system you're used to. Eventually, we're going to move it to a commercial cloud platform. It's just going to be hosted better at the commercial facility. Now, there's disruption because obviously Labor Day we had to power everything off, and we had to hope once we moved, it was literally 200 different servers, 400 applications, thousands of cables. We had to hope that they all came back, and fortunately they have. There's still some dust settling, but we've got it there. But I personally, again, I mean, FCC is only 1,750 people. In terms of government employees, we have less than 41 right now that are actually IT people. Contractor-wise, we have about 300. Even if I had all of them focusing on cybersecurity, which means they would be doing nothing else, and unfortunately they would not be doing the mission of the FCC, that would not be anywhere close to what a Azure or a Google or a AWS or an IBM could match in terms of their cybersecurity experts. And so the reason why I am more willing to trust public cloud is they have every incentive to focus the best and the brightest that they can get. And they can pay more because they're larger scale on cybersecurity than I can. And actually my core mission really should be meeting the mission of the FCC. I mean, infrastructure, it's almost like power. I mean, we don't worry about where the power is coming from, we trust it.
Right.
I'd like to get to the world where public cloud can do that too. Now, it's not there yet. Part of what we've been saying with our vendors when we do these relationships is they need to be able to feed situational awareness into our security operations center. So when the chairman asks me what's going on, I can give him an answer. I don't want to say, I'll let you know in 24 hours because that's not an acceptable answer. And it's also just a recognition that unfortunately everything on the internet, it's like the real world. I mean, there's nothing that prevents right now, as we're talking to these people, that someone could try and drive a car into this building and try to explode it. That's not to make them worried. It's just that the real world is risk-based. Same thing I think is true with the internet. It's risk-based. There's nothing that can be 100% secure. But with a public cloud provider, I can at least trust that they will do everything they can and they will let me know if something's going on because their reputation's on the line just as mine.
All right. Big believer in automating as many security functions as possible?
I am, but keeping a human in the loop because I think a machine is much like a 5-year-old. It's really good at identifying patterns. We don't teach a 5-year-old how to speak. They just absorb language and they pick it up. But when you ask a 5-year-old, why do they say, I walked to school today, as opposed to the school day I walked, their answer is just, that's how I've heard it. So we need to still have the human get in the loop and actually say, is this an exploit or is this just a software error or a hardware error?
How many people did it take you to move all those? I mean, what did you drag people off the street to help you with those trucks?
It was probably about 80 people. And we literally, we worked around the clock. When we encountered, it was midnight when we actually had loaded everything in terms of bubble wrapping the trucks. Our biggest concern was FCC's data. FCC has about 400 terabytes of data. And the concern I had was if a truck got in an accident, we could restore from tape, but that was still going to take weeks. And I don't know if the public was going to have that patience. So what we did was we leased a second storage area network, and we had them go on 2 separate routes at 2 separate times. So it was trying to reduce the probability that something would happen to our data. Unfortunately, the data got there. But yeah, it was, people pulled in sleeping bags. They were sleeping on, and the nice thing is, even when anything as big as this, you're going to have some issues. Mm-hmm. The team rallied, and I think that gets to the cultural dimension too, is when you're going to make the leap to the cloud, it can't just be top down, because there are going to be surprises along the way. Right. And if it's top down and something goes wrong, then people don't feel empowered. I was very intentional over the last 2 years at FCC to do what I call change agents, where they felt empowered, so that when we encountered surprises, I didn't have to ask them to rally. Mm-hmm. They took it on their own to actually be creative problem solvers, and they did it.
Great. You got any photos of that you want to share?
We do. Stay tuned.
You have to email me and check at Daniel Verton on Twitter. I will retweet any photos you send to me of that. Dan Verton, Executive Editor with MeriTalk, here with Mr. David Bray. David is a 2015 Eisenhower Fellow, and he's also the CIO of the FCC. David, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Thanks for watching.